Hi, my name is Michael Spezio. Thanks very much for joining me for a few minutes, allowing me to give my thanks and a little bit of an overview of the work that I and my colleagues have been doing in collaboration with some outstanding organizations that we've been fortunate enough to walk alongside. Uh, Much of the work that I'll be sharing with you has been done in collaboration with outstanding collaborators and with generous funding support from the John Templeton Foundation, the Templeton Religion Trust, the Institute for the Study of Human Flourishing at the University of Oklahoma, the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences, and the National Science Foundation. And we're very grateful for that support. And I'm just going to be able to share a little bit of that work with you. I'm also deeply grateful to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary for selecting me for the recognition for work in academia. I'm deeply grateful, and I continue to be grateful to the seminary for what it's given me ever since that I stepped through the doors the first time so many long years ago. One hesitates to think, and what it continues to give to me. The relationships that I've been so nourished by and enriched by. And I want to call out several people at the seminary who were part of that. And that includes Susan Nelson, Martha Robbins, Ron Stone, George Kem, Andrew Purvis, even remembering a wonderful course on Calvin's Institutes that I had the opportunity and I'm grateful that I had with Charles Partee, and so many other wonderful faculty and colleagues, students, fellow students. My time there was greatly enriched, and hopefully, in my view, I hope you'll hear some of the seminary's own inspiration in some of the work that I'm sharing with you. I also want to thank two outstanding organizations with whom we've had the real fortune to work, and that would be L'Arche, the L'Arche organization, the L'Arche communities, and also Homeboy Industries. Homeboy Industries is located just a stone's throw from where I am. I'm in Pomona, California. I teach at Scripps College in Claremont, California, and Homeboy Industries is in Chinatown. And is an amazing dynamic place. So I'll share a little bit with you about the work that we're doing, and hopefully it'll get you curious and have you think and reflect on your own ideas and concepts with regard to the questions that we're asking. And I hope that if some of you have additional questions, you'll contact me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let me start by saying that a lot of our work has gone into understanding empathy and humility and trying to understand the relationship between these two broad, highly morally relevant concepts. In fact, humility is considered by many traditions to be a virtue, and empathy is considered, at least more recently, to be important for the moral life, for moral transformation. And so some of the questions that we started asking include, what is empathy? What is it really? Are there multiple ways to understand empathy? Is empathy good? Sounds like an odd question. I think empathy is good, but there are many, many smart people, incredibly creative, deep thinkers who think empathy is not only not good, but that empathy is actually actively bad for us. And then we wanted to ask about how organizations like L'Arche and Homeboy Industries think about humility and think about empathy. And then does this have any bearing upon how we imagine the true self and becoming whom we were meant to become? So let me start where all good cognitive science starts, which is in our evolutionary history. And one of the biggest questions that we still don't know the answer to is, how did we end up through evolution with the kinds of brains that we have. Because, of course, if you look here, here's a human adult brain and a human adult skull, and a chimpanzee brain, adult brain, and adult skull. And if you look at this, the skulls are about the same size, but the human brain is so much larger. This creates problems for humans. It creates energy use problems. About 20% of the energy that we expend, even at rest, goes to feed our brains. And childbirth is difficult because of our large brains, because of the large heads that even newborn infants have. They can't even hold their heads up, as everyone knows. And then throughout infancy and becoming a toddler and a child and adolescent, the fact that we take so long to develop the complexity that eventually we have in adulthood, that places us at a distinct disadvantage in terms of vulnerability compared to our esteemed chimpanzee relatives. And so we want to understand why the large brain, why the kinds of connections that we have. And one of the broad theories for how this came to be is called the social intelligence theory. And it says that social affiliation helps explain the size of the human brain rather than dominance. There's another theory called the Machiavellian intelligence theory. It basically says we got large brains so that we could be good Machiavellians. We could dominate each other and manipulate each other into subserving each other's wants and whims, etc. Well, the social intelligence theory says, no, it's really not about domination, it's about affiliation. And if you look at the proportion of stable groups across the mammalian categories here, and you look at the size of the brain measured by something called encephalization slope, you'll see it's a pretty good relationship. And we're here with the other primates, and we can see that there's something that's co-varying between the size of brains and the proportion of groups that are stable. And so one of the questions that we've asked is, well, empathy seems to be important for affiliation. So could we look at empathy and understand its several facets and understand how those facets both helped affiliation in our evolutionary history and might actually contribute, how empathy might contribute to overcoming the differences that threaten our continued existence as communities, as cultures, and as a species. So one of the questions that we looked at is, should we be against empathy? Well, it turns out there are a number of very influential, very smart, and extremely eloquent people who argue that we should be against empathy. One of them is Paul Bloom at the Yale Child Study Center, who wrote a terrific book called Against Empathy. I disagree with almost everything that Paul says, but it's a really terrific book. I do recommend it. Paul defines empathy as the act of coming to experience the world as you think someone else does. Now, I think that's a fine understanding concept of empathy, but it turns out, as we'll see, that it's not the only one, and it's an extremely limiting view of empathy. And he says, on balance, empathy conceived this way is a negative in human affairs. It's not cholesterol, which has both a good and a bad type. It's sugary soda tempting us and delicious and bad for us. So we wanted to look at empathy in relation to another concept in cognitive science called theory of mind, TOM. And theory of mind in cognitive science is defined as a cognitive engagement of others by positing, or at least acting as if they have minds, real minds that are different from our own, not the same as our own. And it turns out that if you go back in time, shortly after the coining of the word empathy in the English language, but prior to cognitive science as any kind of defined engaging discipline, you'll find that Edith Stein, who was a wonderful philosopher and who was in fact murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust, she came up with a brilliant synthesis of empathy in her seminal work on the problem of empathy. She studied with Edmund Husserl, but in fact taught Husserl just about everything he knew about how to understand how people understand one another and how people recognize that there is an I there. And so here are a couple of pictures of Edith Stein. She said that I recognize that the basic problem to the question of empathy as that of perceiving foreign subjects and their experience. And the following expositions will deal with this question. She said, I would like to know not how I arrive at this awareness, but what is the awareness itself. And so Edith Stein said that empathy, which we examined and sought to describe, is the experience of foreign consciousness in general, irrespective of the kind of the experiencing subject or of the subject whose consciousness is experienced. So in sum, Edith Stein's view of empathy is not that we come to experience the experiences of others. No, it's the experience which an authentic I, an authentic self has of another authentic I, another authentic self, an agent. And this is how human beings comprehend the psychic life of their fellow human beings. And so what we wanted to look at is whether there's evidence of such empathy that's very distinct from the empathy that Paul Bloom and the anti-empathy movement talks about. Is there evidence of such empathy in relation to existing communities of intentional virtue? And by that, we mean communities that seek ways of transformation of persons that overcome seemingly insurmountable differences. And so we've done some research and have ongoing research with L'Arche and Homeboy Industries. Now here are a couple of images from L'Arche, which is an international organization that creates communities of friendship with adults who have profound intellectual disabilities. And they are deeply inclusive, and they call the persons with these cognitive differences, sometimes called disabilities, they call them the core members of the community. They demonstrate what it means to be authentically human. And in one of their seminal texts, they say that love is neither sentimental nor a passing emotion. It is the recognition of a covenant, of a mutual belonging. It is listening to others, being concerned for them, and feeling empathy with them. It is to see their beauty and to reveal it to them. One of the other communities that we've worked with, fortunately, is Homeboy Industries. There's a picture I took of Homeboy Industries in Chinatown. And Homeboy Industries has about 10,000 former gang members walk through its doors every day, seeking new life, generally often coming out of prison experiences, surviving those experiences, and looking for ways in which to be who they authentically are. And in this, we talked with leaders of Homeboy who had almost all come through and experienced Homeboy. And we asked them several questions. And one of the questions we asked was about empathy. And we just open-ended the discussion. We just said, don't tell me, what your view of empathy is. We said, what about the word empathy? Is that a word that is here at Homeboys? And one of the answers that I'll share with you is typical of the response that we saw. And the answer is, yeah, that's a word that's action-based here, more than it's talked about. Empathy is just being able to understand where you're at, to say, wherever you're at, I'm going to meet you there. It's like being able to say to someone, I see you, and I want you to know that I see you. When you come to Homeboy Industries, people want to know you. People want to know who you are. That's seeing somebody. That's really seeing somebody. And so what we found in our work together with L'Arche and Homeboy Industries is that empathy is not primarily understood in these communities as a cognitive capacity to really feel one's own way independently, or into another person's experience, or to know the experience of others. Rather, empathy is really an experience that an I has of another I. I see you, and I want you to know that I see you. Empathy is an openness to others' experience, creating space of wanting them to enter that space and wanting to see them and to know their story. So when we've approached this form of empathy in cognitive science, we've taken a couple of ways into this. And one is looking at textual analyses of formative texts within L'Arche. And we published together with Greg Peterson and Robert Roberts, who are both philosophers, to whom I'm very grateful. We published a paper called Humility as Openness to Others, talking specifically about what humility is in interaction in the context of L'Arche. And we also talked about how this kind of humility or kenotic empathy rejects two versions of pride. The pride one is one we know about. It's, I am better than you. It rejects that. But it also rejects pride two, which says I'm your equal in all things, because I'm not. I'm not your equal in all things. And I should never think of myself of that. And the only way that I'm going to be able to open myself up to hearing the difference that you bring to a conversation, a relationship, is if I don't believe that I'm your equal in all things, that I actually have things to learn from you, and that I want to learn them from you, because only you can teach me. So these are the views from L'Arche and Homeboy. And we looked at these views in terms of more detailed formal expressions of values that I have of myself and of others. And we looked at this by saying, well, if there's openness to the other, if there's really kenotic empathy in this way, then the value of self and other should be linked rather than separated in these communities. And so our question was, is there evidence of joint valuational structure for self and other? And then is there neural evidence of this shared valuation of self and other? So we took an approach that used dense array EEG. I won't be able to share very much with you, except to say that we have seen evidence that in the brains of the persons that we've worked with from L'Arche communities, we see a joining of valuation of self and other. And we see this in a region that's typically connected with theory of mind in past work. And so when we look at our core question, we see that, yes, there is evidence of joint valuational structure of self and other in communities of such moral transformation and of radical inclusion. And I really encourage you, if you haven't heard of L'Arche or Homeboy Industries, I really encourage you to look them up. You won't be disappointed. And that brings me then to ask, well, which is the model of the true self? Is it me isolated from all others, needing to think my way into their experiences? Or is it a shared valuation that is exhibited in the famous statue from the Samaritan pair, sometimes called the Good Samaritan, but it's really not about the Samaritan, is it? It's about the pair, about the relationship. The Samaritan wouldn't be who the Samaritan is without the person on the side of the road needing help. Thank you very much for listening and for sharing your time with me. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.